before we moved to Cape Town, I told him I had to return to Highgrove before we left. Admittedly, I am an unabashed royalist, and I now have the utmost respect for Prince Charles, who has not always been treated kindly in the press. Many feel that he is just an appendage waiting to ascend the throne. He's been portrayed as petulant and whiny. But I think if you're lucky enough to go to Highgrove, you may change your mind about the Prince of Wales, which is what I did. He is a very imaginative, thoughtful, nostalgic, creative, funny, and wise individual. Now, to get to Highgrove, you have to book online for tickets, which are carefully timed, and you cannot be later than 15 minutes. You are told exactly where to go, as there are no distinguishing features or signs and no real address. And the cost of one ticket is £27.50, which is 3,347 Rand. Upon arrival, your car and identification documents are carefully checked. Now, let's go into the garden. So where's my notes? Oh, okay. So the first thing you find out is there are no photographs allowed, absolutely none. This was one of only 2 shots that I got on my first visit. And this chap was the serving officer checking credentials at the gate. The use of mobile phones, cameras, binoculars, and all forms of recording equipment is strictly prohibited on the Highgrove estate for security reasons. All visitors are guided in groups by expert guides, and there is no going off-piste anywhere on your own. You must stay with the group. So the rules are very strict. Now, let's begin. This is the sign that really says what is about to happen. Highgrove really is an old-fashioned place in many ways. And the prince has now proven that so many of his old-fashioned, organic, and sustainable strategies are, while old-fashioned, now current and preferred. This is Highgrove today. It is the family home of His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales, and his wife, the Duchess of Cornwall, the former Camilla Parker Bowles. Highgrove is open to the public on selected dates when the family is not there, between April and October. To visit Highgrove is to discover the history, inspiration, and the unique organic management which is behind this incredible series of gardens. This is what the house looked like when Prince Charles bought it in 1980, the year before he married Diana. And he bought it for around £865,000, which was then about $1.1 million. He bought it from Maurice Macmillan, the son of the former UK Prime Minister Harold Macmillan, who was the British Prime Minister in the late 1950s and early 60s. The house was built between 1796 and 1798 in a Georgian neoclassical design on the site of an older property, the most likely architect being a local mason by the name of Anthony Keck. If we contrast this picture with the previous one, you can see that Prince Charles really has done a lot to the house as well as the garden. And there was virtually nothing there. Note the upper balustrade and the decorative urns. All of that was added. So this is the home in which Charles and Diana raised their sons, William and Harry. Princess Diana reportedly wasn't a fan of the 9-bedroom property, which she thought was too small and not private enough. If Prince Harry was about 2 in this picture, then the date would be about 1986, and it was not open to the public at this time. The gardens at Highgrove are world famous, partly because a member of the British royal family has overseen their development very closely for more than 40 years, and partly because they are a model of sustainable gardening, something Prince Charles is truly passionate about. His aim was to have a garden that is as eco-friendly as possible, And this is how he probably looked when he bought the house. Notice the Jack Russell in the background. That is the now departed dog Tigga, to whom he was devoted and to whom he dedicated a memorial in the garden, which we will see a bit later on. Since 1980, both the house and garden have been the subject of many thoughtful and innovative changes. When the prince first arrived, Highgrove possessed little more than a neglected kitchen garden, an overgrown copse, some pasture land, and a few hollow oaks. Today, after the hard work of scores of people, the garden, which is about 15 acres, unfolds in a series of highly personal and inspiring rooms, each one reflecting the prince's interests and enthusiasms. Highgrove now welcomes nearly 40,000 visitors a year, and since it opened to the public 25 years ago, it has now raised £7 million from ticket sales, tours, events, retail, and catering for charities of all sorts. And I might just mention that the retail aspect of Highgrove is heavenly. Now, I don't know if you can see this. They have a shop with lovely gifts, jams, jellies, linens, branded items of wonderful quality and taste, such as this lovely bag given to me by my wonderful friend, Caroline Gilbert, for services rendered, which I couldn't possibly divulge. Charles wanted Highgrove to work with rather than against nature as much as any garden can, but he also had ideas about creating compartments around the house, which would contrast with and complement each other. There are threads of continuity in the form of scent, and there was always fragrance at Highgrove, even if visitors are only subliminally aware of it. Just as topiary and acers, or maples, are recurrent leitmotifs, golden Philadelphus, sometimes called mock orange, and scented daphnes link one garden to the next. There's even an arboretum. And on my tour, we were told that there was a bakery nearby, obviously baking something very chocolatey. There was the most heavenly scent of chocolate in the late morning air, but it wasn't chocolate. It wasn't a bakery. It was the scent of a tree, the flower of which smelled just like chocolate. It was really quite extraordinary. The beautiful Georgian house at Highgrove is festooned with climbing plants like wisteria, honeysuckle, and jasmine, all with wonderful scents, creating a true country garden feel. But the house is also fitted with solar panels, making it energy efficient and economical to heat. From nothing, this is what Highgrove looks like today, with many of the trees and shrubs planted by Prince Charles himself. What he is possibly the most famous for is his strict adherence to organic, sustainable gardening practices, which he has been passionate about for decades. Now it's fashionable, but in the 1980s, Charles was pilloried for it. People laughed at him, but they are not laughing now. Each garden room contains its own private pleasures, which then takes the viewer on to the next scene, with the house sometimes the focus glimpsed through the trees. Highgrove consists of the terrace garden, the cottage garden, thyme walk, lily pool garden, sundial garden, and carpet garden. Further afield come the walled kitchen garden, the model fruit garden, the cutting garden, azalea walk, lavender orchard, southern hemisphere garden, woodland garden, and arboretum. Unfortunately, we can't see them all today, but we are going to visit a few, starting with this, the sundial garden. And this was the first section. This is the first section that the prince replanted, which contains neat rows of boxwood and yew on the corner, as in Y-E-W, yew. Prince William and Harry played here and in other parts of the garden as youngsters. Centered by a large stone sundial, which was a gift from the Duke of Beaufort, this area blooms with purple, pink, and blue delphiniums, said to be the prince's favorite flower. Everywhere you look, there are pots, sculpture, little hobbit houses, and lots of mementos and gifts that the prince has received over his lifetime and placed throughout the garden. It is a complete tapestry of his life, his influences, and what he holds dear. To visit Highgrove is to literally meet the prince and to understand him better. Here's an example of the hidden architecture I'm talking about, waiting around every corner to be discovered. The prince has a private retreat known as the Sanctuary. This was built in 2000, and this is where he reads, writes, and generally does whatever heirs to the throne do in their downtime. Entrance is strictly by invitation. One of the most famous areas of Highgrove is the Wildflower Meadow, which alone is worth the ticket price in the springtime. This peaceful meadow is a 4-acre plot dotted with oaks, chestnuts, poplars, and beech trees. Sanctuary to different wildlife throughout the seasons, the meadow was originally planted with a 32 species seed mix in 1982. It's managed as a traditional hay meadow. So seed-rich green hay introduces new species each year, creating a constantly evolving landscape that is cultivated in harmony with the seasons. Now the Wildflower Meadow today contains more than 130 wildlife species, among them wild daffodils, narcissus, and orchids. And here we see beautiful allium, the purple balls, and camassia. A plant called yellow rattle keeps the grasses cropped. And what, might you ask, is yellow rattle? Its proper name is Rhinanthus minor, and it has burnished gold flowers which look like tiny turtles hatching from their eggs. It has a practical use, which is as a partial parasite, which can be used to reduce the vigor of meadow grasses, letting other flowers flourish, becoming a mainstay within wildflower seed mixtures. Over 5 types of orchid thrive in the meadow soil. Spring sees the lent lily and ice follies appear, while the meadow is cut in the summer for hay and grazed by sheep between September and December, which help, the sheep actually help to tread the wildflower seed back into the ground. Literally, the grazing sheep pound the seeds with their hooves, giving the seeds their winter soil covering. This is the famous thyme walk, and that's T-H-Y-M-E, because there are many varieties of thyme, which the prince apparently planted himself. Clipped golden yew line the thyme walk, an impressive avenue planted with 20 different varieties of thyme, interspersed with marjoram and primroses. So as you walk over the thyme, it releases its scent. This bold promenade draws your eye towards the house and the terrace garden, while the eccentric shapes of the yew topiary create a whimsical aesthetic. And there is a lot of whimsy at Highgrove. The yellow yew were here in 1980 when he first bought the house, but they were just blobs, round balls. And Charles was apparently advised by everyone to take them out. Instead, he patiently turned them into weird and wonderful shapes. Yew, by the way, is very, very slow growing. So if you plant it, you have to be very patient. Here's a wonderful aerial view of Thyme Walk. And on each side of the topiary are hornbeam, but at the bottom of Thyme Walk lies the lily pool garden and a bronze sculpture of a Borghese gladiator, which was given to the prince by Lord Cholmondeley. And here's our life-size bronze gladiator watching over Thyme Walk. This sculpture is a replica of a Borghese gladiator discovered in the early 17th century, the original of which is now in the Louvre in Paris. The walk and surrounding lawns are enclosed entirely by a striking clipped yew hedge designed by Sir Roy Strong. Now this obviously reflects one of the more formal aspects of the garden. And who, you might ask, is exactly Roy Strong? Well, Sir Roy, the irrepressible Sir Roy, is one of those deliciously quirky and fabulously foppish English individuals. He is an art historian, museum curator, writer, broadcaster, and landscape gardener. He has served as director of both the National Portrait Gallery and the Victoria and Albert Museums in London. Strong was knighted in 1982, and he is now 84 years old. Here are more pictures of the topiary, each more different than the next. And here's another shot with what's called a pepper pot, which Charles designed himself. But you can see further afield, even beyond the yew hedge, the trees, and everywhere you look, there's just greenery and lush design. Apparently, the topiary is clipped once a year in the autumn. And lastly, as we leave the time walk, here is a bird in flight as a part of Sir Roy's hedge. Highgrove is a garden steeped in personality and poignancy, humor, and thoughtfulness. The planting is generous and for the most part relaxed rather than regimented. Quoting Debs Goodenough, the head gardener at Highgrove, this garden has a deliberately soft feel. You'll find weeds if you look for them, but we don't get uptight about them. We're not really trying to impose absolute order on nature, she says, but to achieve harmony. Plants are left to self-seed. Then if they go a bit crazy and they start to invade other areas, they're pulled up. This is a garden full of surprise and pockets of carefully constructed wilderness where ferns grow as tall as a child and games of hide and seek might never end. Charles, now age 71, my age, knows every nook and cranny of his extraordinary horticultural masterpiece. Make no mistake, this is not just a rural retreat, but a hands-on haven where you are just as likely to find the Prince of Wales weeding as reading or hacking back undergrowth. Alas, he wasn't weeding the 2 times I visited. Now I'm going to take you into the cottage garden. And again, look at the structure. I mean, little gnomes must live there. Everywhere are the most glorious flowers in the cottage garden, drifts of color, and everything looking so healthy. As a toddler, Prince Harry was once found hiding in this urn in the cottage garden. Can you imagine? 15 acres. Harry, where are you, darling? Repeated cluster of Hebe Reichenensis guard the corners of the cottage garden. There's more delphinium and a lovely red beech, I believe, on the left. This is the fastigated Hornbeam Avenue, which leads to the working kitchen garden. Now, fastigated means erect and parallel. So again, this represents a more formal aspect, which is in contrast to the other areas of wildness and relaxed planting. And here is the kitchen garden. Everything at Highgrove is grown organically, flowers, fruit, and vegetables alike. Prince Charles relies on the use of natural fertilizers. For example, more than 100 wheelbarrows full of manure from the prince's cattle herds are used in the garden every year. This approach also extends to the vegetables grown at the estate's farm, home farm, and the animals are only given homeopathic remedies rather than antibiotics. He does not allow any chemicals to be used for weed control, preferring instead to rely on organic methods that protect the soil and don't leave residue on fruit and veg. When I saw the kitchen garden, it was absolutely massive, with many defined areas with virtually every kind of vegetable and fruit, a real cornucopia, and a great deal is used for the catering side of Highgrove, where you can have a lovely lunch or tea. Here you can see in the kitchen garden an espaliered apple tree trimmed and snipped to create an arch. Now, this technique of building an arch is called pleaching. Only natural pest and weed control is used, as I've mentioned. He prefers to rely on local wildlife, bugs to feast on the aphids, birds to gobble up the slugs and snails, and even the local stoats or weasels to keep the rabbit population in check. The day I visited, I noted that around almost every portion of the kitchen garden were small, clipped box hedges, but the gardeners were busy taking out all the box because of something called box blight, which is a terrible fungus which destroys box, that most English of hedges. Because the prince will not allow insecticides, it had to be managed organically. In other words, it was being taken out to be destroyed and an alternative was going to be planted. This is the water feature in the middle of the kitchen garden, and there are many, many water features. And like many of them, it was made to look old, now encrusted with lovely moss. This gives you an idea of the bounty of the kitchen garden. Probably lovely fruits and veg on its way to the orchard room for teas and lunches. So Highgrove offers a series of beautiful interlinked gardens created by the prince that range in style from wild to formal. Orchards and arbors are also in the mix. But did he really do this all by himself? Well, no, actually. He had lots of advice and consults from top English gardeners like the late Marchioness of Salisbury, also the late Rosemary Verey, and the naturalist Miriam Rothschild. Now, Rosemary Verey, whom I once met in Atlanta at a flower show, was a much revered English garden designer, lecturer, and prolific garden writer, whose own garden at Barnsley House near Cirencester was very famous. She died in 2001, but she was a huge influence on Prince Charles. Her house with garden is now a boutique hotel called Barnsley House. And if you are visiting Highgrove, I recommend you plan to spend the night at Barnsley House the night before. So on our way to Highgrove, my husband and I did just that, and here it is, Barnsley House. Note the lovely, soft Cotswold stone, which is so typical throughout Gloucestershire. And you can see Mrs. Verey didn't really do topiary, but she certainly had a lot of yew. And here's Prince Charles. Oh, geez, he's gained a lot of weight. Oh, sorry, that's my husband, Jeff. And this is Rosemary Verey's garden, which is still lovely. And some of her own gardeners still work there. It's obviously not as big as Highgrove, but if you do go, try and stay, because it really puts you in the mood to see Highgrove. And it's close by. It's like a half an hour. So you can get there after a full, lovely English breakfast, which is exactly what we did. Now, even though Prince Charles is incredibly hands-on, he has a great team of gardeners, as you would imagine. And over the years, he's sought the advice and counsel of lots of friends and professionals, like Rosemary Verey. His head gardener is Debs Goodenough. And Charles has been working with Debs since 2008. She oversees a team of 11 gardeners who work to make the 15 acres as luscious and beautiful and sustainable as possible, combining the traditional with the modern. Debs is from Canada originally. She's 59 years old, and she grew up on a farm in the province of Alberta in the foothills of the Rockies, southwest of Edmonton, where it is extremely cold for long, long periods of the year. Goodenough became serious about horticultural research after doing various jobs in Canada, and she secured a one-year attachment to the Royal Botanical Gardens at Kew in 1983. It was there that she met her husband, Simon, who had exchanged a career in oil geology for horticulture. They moved to the Isle of Wight, where he worked at the Ventnor Botanic Garden, and she became the head gardener at Osborne House, Queen Victoria's former residence. Highgrove is unique, says Debs. Everywhere you look, there is beauty and harmony. Gardens bring out the best in us. That's why they matter. I have to say, Debs is a woman after my own heart. Arguably, Charles's greatest influence at Highgrove was his beloved grandmother, the Queen Mother, who was also Queen Elizabeth, who died in 2002 aged 101. This corner of the stumpery, which is the very famous part of the garden, is dedicated to her. The prince was very close to his late grandmother, the Queen Mother, and as a tribute to her, there are many of her favorite scented azaleas and a wealth of delphiniums, her favorite flower, in every hue. There is also a bronze frieze depicting the Queen Mother in her gardening hat and pearls. Need I say more? Here's another shot of his tribute to his grandmother. Notice the wacky, whimsical tone of this memorial, and that this feel permeates this garden. This is the area called the stumpery, which we are shortly coming to. Here is Azalea Walk, and at the end is a sculpture of Diana the Huntress. If this is a token nod to his late wife, then it is about the only one here. Interestingly, there is not really very much of a tribute to the Queen either. The yellow azalea on both sides is one of the few scented azaleas, and my family had one of these growing up in our back garden in New Hampshire, where I lived as a child. This is another picture from further away, but note the pots and the Ottoman-inspired arch, plus the wonderful stonework. Everywhere you look at Highgrove, it's just a feast for the eyes, and it reflects what and who has been the most important influence on the prince. Separating one room from another is this dry stone wall, which is called the Wall of Worthies. And on it at the top, you'll see numerous busts of people who've influenced the prince in his life, from famous composers to environmental activists. Again, this gives real insight into who the prince is and who he has valued. I can't tell you who this chap is, unfortunately, but obviously intense. The wall also contains bits of shards from other buildings, making it quite a montage of bits and pieces. So remember the little Jack Russell that we saw in one of the first few slides? Well, here is Tigga's memorial. Apparently she went down a hole and never came up. The prince looked and looked for weeks, apparently, to find her. You can just make out the words under the picture of the sleeping dog. Very sweet. Now, it was probably at this point in my first visit that my friend Gail and I started to cry. Another eminent influence on Charles is the husband and wife team of Isabel and Julian Bannerman, and they live in a place called Hanman Court near Bristol. The Bannermans established themselves in the 1990s as the go-to landscape designers for aristocrats, plutocrats, and royalty. In addition to the Prince of Wales at Highgrove, their clients include Lord Rothschild of Wadston Manor and John Paul Getty at Wormsley. Both of these gardens I have visited because they were both close to where I lived in Chalfont St. Giles. So the Bannerman's signature style satisfies the British desire for grandness tempered by whimsy. Otherwise, one would be seen to be showing off, which would be most regrettable. To that end, their approach is rooted in classical tradition, but rife with humorous moments, especially commissioned garden buildings designed along historical lines like follies or grottos. Certainly abound at Highgrove and are part of their signature. Plantings are also intensely romantic and English in a Bannerman garden. Now, this brings us to the stumpery. Nowhere is this more evident than the stumpery. A rich habitat for a variety of wildlife, the stumpery is an atmospheric garden that draws inspiration from the Victorian concept of growing ferns amongst upturned tree stumps. And this is an enchanting space that highlights the sculptural qualities of wood. The stumpery features a series of remarkable natural structures, including 2 classical temples crafted from green oak and cut to resemble stone. Now you can see beautiful allium here. This is one of the many follies that are incorporated into the stumpery. And there are so many wonderful places just sit and reflect, dream, and listen. So the stumpery is actually a garden of dead tree trunks and logs, which have been upended and artfully arranged in a shady place. It's a Victorian invention. Prince Charles really brought the whole concept of stumperies back. And it's a home to ferns, lichens, moss, other forest floor plants, heliobores, and hostas. There are many, many hostas at Highgrove. The Highgrove stumpery was created out of a messy copse of broadleaf trees. The stumps are those of oak and chestnut, windblown trees from different estates, mostly from the big storm of 1987, the year before I arrived in the United Kingdom. The stumpery is a lush corner of profusion. It's tremendously atmospheric. There are ferns and ammonites set into the pathway, and I've already mentioned the two classical temples. Now, in one corner of the stumpery is the famous treehouse built for Princes William and Harry. And just note that naughty garden gnome. That's not something you would expect to see in Prince Charles's garden. Here's a better picture. Now this treehouse is enjoyed by Prince George, Prince Charlotte, and Prince Louis, all of whom are perfectly adorable and well-behaved. Again, here's another view of this most magical of structures. As we leave the stumpery, I'm going to give you a bit more detail about the sustainable practices at Highgrove, which are held to the strictest principles: ethical management of the gardens and recycling of all waste materials ensure that they thrive in complete harmony with nature. So Prince Charles practices what he preaches, and he personally tries to live in a more sustainable way. For instance, all 15 acres are completely organic. Wood pellet fired boilers are used to heat Highgrove House, the orchard tea room, stables, and offices. Most of the electricity is sourced from a renewable energy supplier and from solar panels, which are on the farm barns and some on the house, as I've mentioned. The electricity is used in Highgrove House and the orchard tea room. Ground source heat pumps are used to heat the staff cottages and the greenhouses, and an air source heat pump heats the gardener's mess and some of the workshops. This is another picture of the stumpery. Now this is very cool. A specially built reed bed sewage system, much loved by dragonflies at its treatment end, is used for all of Highgrove's waste. This processes the raw sewage from the house through a bark-filled pit together with reed and willow beds, which filter the water so completely that in the 11 years of testing, no pollutants have ever been found. Gutter rainwater is collected into tanks from the house, the orchard room, and the cowshed, and the tanks hold 23,000 gallons. And the water is used in the toilets in the orchard tea room. The rainwater is also used to irrigate the garden. As you would expect, the gardeners make their own compost and leaf mold, and a little willow ramp is placed in each water feature to provide an easy exit in case any wildlife inadvertently falls into one of the little ponds. Now here you can see, we've seen this slide, but look at the bottom on the left-hand side, you can see a little willow ramp. So in case you're a little dormouse and you fall in for an unexpected swim, this is how you can get out. How thoughtful is that? 200 chickens roam areas of the estate under a mixed range of fruit trees. And from these hens, around 4,200 eggs are collected every year. The eggs are used in the orchard tea room, the restaurant, and sold in the Highgrove shop, which is in Tetbury. Well, there's a Highgrove shop at Highgrove as well. There are 2 fountains in the garden providing running open water for birds throughout the year. And the Highgrove estate is also the location of Home Farm, a center of excellence for organic farming. Now here's one of the fountains. Designed by the Bannermans, and it's made to look old. It has a gigantic gunnera on the top of it. That's one of the hugest plants going. And just note the beautiful sculpture. What you can't see in this picture is the dripping water coming down from the rocks, which encourages all the lichen and the moss. So I've mentioned Home Farm, which is adjacent to Highgrove. Prince Charles converted the 900 acres of Home Farm to organic farming in 1986. He was initially criticized for some of his methods, by many British farmers who disliked his choice to avoid using modern techniques. But since that time, a significant number of farms have subsequently switched to organic agriculture. And farmers come to visit Duchy Farm all the time to review methods there. In 2006, a man named Patrick Holden, who was the director of the Soil Association in Britain, declared that, quote, "I don't think it can be overestimated how much that these practices were due to the Prince's influence. Prince Charles has been pioneering agriculture techniques for over 30 years, and he continues to do so." This is a recent picture posted on Highgrove's Twitter account, and it's posted in March. So no one was seeing this except for the Prince and the Duchess and their families. It shows that even in late March, all sorts of wonderful daffodils and tulips are blooming. I would like to personally thank Prince Charles for giving us this little piece of heaven and for espousing principles that all gardeners should try and live up to. So many English rarities are grown at Highgrove, including varieties now virtually extinct. Underlying it all is the Prince's deep felt conviction that his garden must be self-sufficient, with emphasis on water conservation, green waste recycling, natural pest control, and organic fertilizers. As such, the garden works on all levels, beautiful to the eye of any beholder, and an inspiration to gardeners wishing to benefit from the Prince's experimentation over more than 3 decades. In his own words, quote, "I have done my utmost to create a kind of archive of rare and endangered fruit, vegetables, trees, and plants, which I hope will help in a small way to preserve the essential biodiversity on which ultimately our survival depends." Bravo, Prince Charles. And thank you everyone for attending today. I so appreciate it. I'm going to ask Amanda to bring us all together. And now I'm
Everybody's back on now.
end of slide, end of show.
So you can now end. I'm going to end your. Yeah, I'm going to stop your sharing. There we go.
Why not?
Now, does anybody have any questions?
Thank you.
Really fabulous. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Fantastic, ladies. Fabulous.
Sisters, Margaret. Lovely, lovely.
Thank you.
Beautiful, Margie.
Thank you, Lizzie.
Absolutely beautiful.
Hi, Lindy.
What about a lecture? What about a talk for the IWC at Kelvin, Margie? You're a brilliant lecturer.
Absolutely.
I have offered to do something next month, a tour of several French gardens. If you all are interested, I will.
Yes.
Yes, please, Margaret.
Okay.
You have the presidential vote. Yes, please.
Great. Okay.
I can do it, so can you.
Little peer pressure there, hey, Elizabeth?
So,
I can hear her.
anybody have any questions?
Chris then? Oh,
Margaret?
go that way.
No, it's all beautiful.
Lindy.
Okay.
Oh, how do you get there from London,
And
Margie?
Joe. Yes.
Great, Lindy. Lindy has a question. Quiet, everyone.
Hello,
Lindy.
Renee.
Wait. I'm going to mute everyone, Margaret, and then the person that you wish to unmute, then we'll unmute them individually for their question. Are you okay with that? Let me just unmute Margaret. And 1 second, Margaret. Okay, you're unmuted.
Yeah, so Amanda can see you.
Yeah, so just tell me who is it? Lindy, you want unmuted?
I was actually just going to make a comment. Thank you very much. That was absolutely outstanding. I actually have visited Highgrove myself, and it is an absolute gem. I wanted to refresh my memory, and you did it beautifully. And
Thank you.
I just wanted to say that a lot of the, I think all the admission fees goes to his trust, to the Prince's Trust. So it's he doesn't have he doesn't make profit from this. So I mean, he is a remarkable man. I'm also a royalist, and he is a remarkable man in what he's taught people over the years. But it does go to the Prince's Trust.
It definitely does. Definitely. Like all 7 million of it, which is quite something.
Right. Fantastic.
Anybody have another? Oh, Lizzie, you asked, how do you get there? Well, down the M3, is that right, Mal? No, up the
M4.
M4. Down the M4 and then north to Topiary, and then down a small back road to Highgrove. You don't know where you're going until you get the information from the tickets. And by the way, I'm told by my technical assistant, my husband, who's been extremely helpful in all this, that the cost of the ticket is not the enormous amount I gave you, but it's rather 580 Rand. Anyway, that sounds more reasonable, doesn't it? So anybody have another question? Yes, do.
I just wanted to mention that if you wish, can you hear me?
Yes, Sue, we can hear you.
Yes, I just wanted to mention if you were wanting to go by train, it's really not easy. The train station is miles away from Topiary, although it's supposedly Topiary station. It's just impossible. So you do actually need a car or some other way of doing it. There are a few buses around too, but they're also few and far between. Because when I'm in England, I like to use the public transport because I find I see much more of the country and can, as you say, these little lanes and things, you can just hop off the bus and go and explore. Whereas with the car, it's not always that easy. So everybody who wants to go by train, forget it. It's not easy.
I'm sure you're right. And the thing about booking is you can only do it online, and you can only do it when he's not there. So if you are planning a trip to the UK at some point in the dim future, try and just go online as soon as you know you're going to go if you want to visit, because you have to really plan this well in advance. So any other questions? Gosh. Oh, yes. Do you have a question? Di, do you have a question, Di? That's Rosemary's iPad. Do you see Rosemary's iPad, Jenny and Di and Rosemary?
I've just unmuted them. There we go. I can ask the question now.
Okay, girls.
Oh, wow, yeah, there's 3 of them.
We live together. Yeah, we live together.
We're one family.
We live together.
We've been together since lockdown, every day.
Excellent. Di, did you have a question?
No. I wanted to say thank you.
Oh, okay. My pleasure.
It was fabulous. Absolutely fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, everyone. Well, that's me.
I think Karen had a question.
Out. Yeah, Min.
Karen, did you? Yes, Karen has a question. I'm trying to unmute you, Karen. You must okay, there you go.
Okay, I'm on mute. Hi, Margaret. Thanks so much.
Karen.
That was utterly amazing. And I visited lots of National Trust gardens, which are fabulous, but this just looks unbelievably immense. I've got 2 questions. My first bit was there a particular part of the garden that you especially loved? And my second question is Did you do lunch there and was it good?
The answer to your first question is, I think the sundial garden, which is basically in back of me, and I had a number of slides about, the ones with the beautiful delphiniums. I tend to love the big blousy, lots of flowers and masses of plantings. I loved the sundial garden and the cottage garden. And as I remember, I think Gail and I had a cup of tea, and I don't think we had lunch, but I can tell you that it's delicious. So the food there would be delicious. And, occasionally they have fundraising or champagne teas, and the tickets are, pretty hefty. But I can't really remember a meal experience, but I think it was pretty good if we did. Anyway.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, ladies, I will see you next month in France. And thank you so much for your participation. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. And it's given me a lot of fun and it's been great to work on this. So appreciate it.
But just before everybody goes, please may I just say an official thank you. I echo exactly what everybody said. It really was amazing and brought everything back to me, brought it alive again. And for me, yeah, I felt quite tearful as well. It's one of those places that brings lots of emotions to the fore, as well as being just beautiful. And yes, I've always admired Prince Charles, and I think the naysayers are wrong. I really do believe he has people and animals and plants. He has the world in his grasp, and he wishes to do the best for it and never do any harm. But anyway, thank you so much officially from the IWC, from the board, and
you're welcome.
Yes, thank you, Margaret. It was
You're
really
welcome.
fantastic.
Amazing.
Bye, all my
Thank
friends,
you.
and special thanks to Amanda.
Thank you very much, Amanda.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to end the meeting. Is everyone okay with
Bye,
that?
Al. Bye,
Thank
Beyond.
you. Bye, everyone. Love everyone.
Lots of love. Bye.
Bye-bye.